Chapter 17. Strange Visit. As tired as Jenni felt, she couldn't sleep. The pillow was hard and the bed itself was uncomfortable, especially after she had gotten used to the one at the palace. She snuggled up under the one blanket that the inn had provided for the two of them, and did her best not to think about the events of the day. In the darkness she could hear the heavy breathing that indicated her husband had had no trouble getting to sleep this night. If he could sleep so easily, why couldn't she? Well, for a start, it was too early. Jenni's body was geared to sleeping at a certain time each night. True, since she had been staying at the palace, her bedtime had moved a little earlier than when she had lived in the Moth. There had been so little to do at the palace in the evenings that once she and the prince had parted for the night, she would often go straight to bed. Tonight, though, because of how tired they had both been feeling, she and the prince had turned in a great deal earlier still. Also, try as she might, she couldn't get certain thoughts out of her head. Watching both of her parents and her grandfather slaughtered in front of her while she just sat there and did nothing, she kept reliving the day's events. Could she have done something? Maybe if she had moved sooner she could have saved someone's life. She was beginning to feel a little guilty about what had happened. On top of that, Jenni couldn't help feel a modicum of guilt for this night. It was her wedding night and she had refused her husband. After what had happened today, the prince could hardly blame her. Besides, hadn't he said he wasn't feeling capable this night? So why was she the one feeling guilty about it? It was her wedding night, but she didn't really feel married. Her wedding day had been ruined. The wedding itself had gone like a dream, but the rest of the day had been a disaster. A bunch of harpies entering the great hall and slaughtering the wedding guests could do that. She glanced over at the sleeping form of her husband and wondered if he'd be willing to marry her again, just so that she could have an unsullied memory of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Jenni sighed. She wasn't getting anywhere just laying here. She pushed the blanket back and climbed out of bed. Sometimes, when she hadn't been able to sleep back in the palace, she would get up, look out of the window of her room, and watch the world go by for a few minutes. As Jenni climbed out of bed, she noticed there was a little bit of candlelight coming into the room from the anteroom. Most likely Alice was still in the chair where Jenni had left her, trying her best to keep herself occupied so she wouldn't fall asleep. Jenni decided she would do them both a favour. A nice late-night chat would help to keep Alice company and her own mind to relax. Jenni didn't bother with getting dressed. There didn't seem to be a lot of point. She just walked over to the door in her underthings and stepped through into the candlelit anteroom. At first, what lay beyond her bedroom came as something of a shock. It was so much of a shock that Jenni's first instinct was to duck back into the bedroom and wake her husband, though what either of them would be able to do unarmed against a harpy that seemed to have taken up residence in their anteroom was beyond her. The harpy in question had made herself at home in the chair that, until recently, had seated Alice. It was a very comfortable chair, but the harpy looked anything but comfortable as she sat there. Her wings were flattened against the backrest of the chair in such a way that it was hard to see how they could fit. Her tail had to be scrunched up under her in a most awkward posture. Yet in both cases the creature didn't seem to notice. The harpy said nothing as Jenni entered the room, though she did tilt her head gently to one side, turning it enough to watch Jenni's every move. Then she moved one arm and indicated that Jenni should take the empty seat opposite her. "Who are you?" Jenni said tersely. "What have you done with Alice?" "Alice is well," the harpy said. Her words were spoken in crisp, perfect, flourished tones, and echoed gently around the room as if they had somehow been enhanced. She kept her eyes fully on Jenni, and yet made it look as if she was only watching Jenni out of casual interest. She went out to enjoy the street celebrations. She didn't even notice me. "Are you sure?" Jenni threatened. "She might be back at any moment with a contingent of soldiers to arrest you." "That won't happen," the harpy said calmly. "We live in different worlds, she and I. Please, take a seat." "Who are you?" Jenni asked. She took a few tentative steps towards the chair in question, circling the harpy suspiciously. "Who would you like me to be?" the harpy spoke. There was a subtle smile on her lips. "I'd like you to be anything other than a harpy," Jenni said. She was further into the room than she had intended. She approached the back of the chair the harpy had indicated and rested her arms lightly on top of it. "I am hurt," the harpy replied. "Harpies are such lovely creatures. We are so graceful in the sky. Just ask your brother. After all, you haven't always hated harpies, have you?" "Greyfulf would," Jenni began, Reyes. Your brother Reyes. What does he think about harpies? He with that unhealthy love he had for the harpy shape, the natural curves of a harpy's body. Never once did it occur to you to tell him that his love for harpies was quite natural. That would have meant telling him he was a harpy, Jenni objected. Which was bad. Why? The harpy asked. She looked at Jenni sternly. We had to hide him, Jenni explained. We had to protect him from discovery. We couldn't risk telling him who he was in case it sent him over the edge, the harpy said. And it didn't, did it? Your brother Reyes is probably one of the most well-adjusted harpies out there. He still loves you, by the way. He still thinks of you occasionally and wishes he could see you again. His one big regret is that he couldn't make it to your wedding. I wanted him there, but I couldn't invite him, Jenni said. I even tried to get special dispensation from the king for him. Maybe you can address that later when you see him, the harpy replied. I'm going to see him again, Jenni asked hopefully. All things being equal, the harpy replied. And assuming that neither you nor Reyes die in the meantime, I think you may be reunited with your brother in a very short period of time. I'd be more than happy to see him again, Jenni said hopefully. The harpy nodded. I know. Please take a seat, I'm not going to eat you. It was strange, but for some reason Jenni was beginning to feel she could trust this harpy. She moved round to the front of the chair and made herself as comfortable as she could. I still don't know who you are. Why are you here? The harpy laughed. My name is unimportant. If I told you my name was Gaggara, Jenni, or Lamawort, what difference would it make to you? I'm still just a harpy. Actually, I recognise all but one of those names, Jenni said. Gaggara is the name of my brother's girlfriend. Lagnoff was her mother, and Lamawort is the harpy who was famous for using magic and living to be 90. Lamawort the Eternal. 64, actually, the harpy replied. You chose those names for a reason, didn't you? Jenni said. I'm trying to point out the futility of names, the harpy commented. You know Gaggara as Reyes' girlfriend, but did you know that that was also the name of his birth mother? Then there's Lagnoff, his girlfriend's mother. She was also the best friend of his mother, and was attendant at his birth. Finally, I named Jenni. She helped bring your brother into the world, and was beheaded by one of your father's knights as a reward. How do you know all this? Jenni asked. Does it matter how I know? The harpy replied. The fact is, I know. Just who are you? Jenni insisted. That again? The harpy replied. She sighed. Very well, I'll give you a clue. My life as a harpy began a mere 300 years ago. I became quite famous in my time, and even after that life ended, my legend continued to grow and grow. The only famous harpy I know is Lamawort, Jenni commented. Lamawort, the harpy said, the fourth name on the list. Yes, I too was at your brother's birth, in spirit. I visited both his mother and her friend in a dream the night before. It was I that suggested to her that it be best if his mother should try and drown her son in the river, rather than simply smash his brains out on some nearby rocks. You what? Jenni said, startled. Because I knew he'd survive for you to find him, the harpy claiming to be Lamawort clarified. I have some small ability in seeing into the future. You wanted me to, Jenni started. Adopt him, get to know him, love him as a brother, Lamawort interrupted. Yes. So, Lamawort, if that is truly your name, why are you here? Jenni asked. Lamawort grinned. Yes, I am Lamawort. I lived as Lamawort for 64 years. It's hardly the definition of eternal, is it? I suppose, considering the average life of a harpy is little more than 30 to 35 years, 64 probably seemed quite a feat. Maybe, Lamawort replied. You must have had a reason for coming here tonight, Jenni said. Why do you keep changing the subject? As I have said, I have a small gift for seeing into the future. I'm just here to warn you about a possible future, Lamawort commented. Jenni sounded doubtful. Why should you care what happens to some human? Oh, Lamawort replied, I care. She paused, then said, there are many possible futures. In some of them you die, in others you live. Which one actually happens when the time comes depends a lot on the actions you take between now and then. Say, for example, something is going to happen to you tomorrow afternoon. Let's say that I've looked into the future and seen that in a number of possible futures chosen at random, you will be attacked sometime tomorrow in most of them. Oh, Jenni replied cynically. Now, Lamawort said, let's assume that I look at all possible futures where you are attacked, and where you try to fight the attackers off. Dependent on whether you use a sword that you plan to purchase sometime tomorrow morning, or try to fend them off with your one laughable sleep spell. You end up dead in most of them. Your new husband will die, and his sister will die. You will all die. What are you saying? Jenni asked. Well, I thought that was obvious, Lamawort replied. Don't fight. If you don't fight tomorrow, your chances of survival increase greatly. I thought you said this was all just an example, Jenni said. It is, Lamawort replied. I see, Jenni commented. By the way, your mind hasn't gotten there yet, but it will. Klemper has been intercepting and reading your mail since you first arrived at the palace just over a year ago. He knows all about Reyes. He knows that Reyes has betrayed the Elven army. To be honest, he knew about Reyes shortly after he first entered Ghostbond, but he doesn't care. To Klemper and his master, even this invasion's just a means to an end. Who is Klemper's master? Jenni asked. That I can't tell you, Lamawort replied. You don't know, Jenni goaded. Oh, I know, Lamawort replied. It's just that I can't tell you, yet. Why? Jenni pressed. Because then you will die within the next 24 hours, Lamawort replied. How does knowing the name of this master kill me? Jenni asked. You die because the master doesn't want you to know yet. His power is unmatched. He could reach out and strike you down even if you were on the other side of the world. If I told you his name, you might not even make it until morning. Really? Jenni was doubtful, but perhaps also a little afraid. If the master was really this powerful, then what chance did any of them have? I have to go, Lamawort said. This close to the gate, I feel so much weaker. I've probably been here too long already. Gate? Jenni asked. What gate? I almost feel as powerless as a mortal, Lamawort said with a grin, not answering the question. I'm going to leave you with a small gift. A gift? Jenni repeated. It's a small thing, but it will greatly increase your chances of survival over the next few days. An offensive spell? Jenni suggested. A language, the Harpy replied. A language you already know, but I will teach it to you properly. The anteroom faded. Jenni woke up. She found that she was lying on her back, in a slightly awkward position, with her legs hanging over the edge of the bed. In his sleep, the prince had taken advantage of the situation, and had claimed a good part of her side of the bed for himself. Or perhaps without intending to do so, he had slowly pushed her out of bed in the first place. Jenni smiled at her husband. After a few refreshing hours of dreamless sleep, she was feeling much better. She no longer fretted about him seeing her in her underwear. She climbed carefully out of bed, trying not to shake the mattress too much and wake him. Then she set about taking hold of the prince's legs and swinging them back to his side of the bed. As she was preparing to climb back into bed, she noticed that there was still candlelight coming in through the door from the anteroom. Alice was still up, trying to stay awake for the whole night. Jenni hoped she would succeed.